Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Biblical Anarchy Podcast live here in the LCI Green Room. Happy to be with you all tonight on a Monday evening. Uh, I don't have a consistent schedule anymore. Life's just too crazy. As many of you know, my wife is expecting our fifth child, and my wife's been in full nesting mode for what seems like the better part of 6 months. So we've just been very crazy on our end, but I'm going to try to churn out as much content as I can here before I go offline for a couple weeks once the baby comes. I'm excited for the conversation I'm going to have tonight with a first-time guest of this show. Before we get into it, before you do anything else, please make sure that if you're watching this on YouTube, you like and you subscribe to this. If you're watching on Facebook or X, that's fine, although my preference is if you watch on YouTube. So if you want to skedaddle over to YouTube, the link should be on my X page, and if you go to just go to YouTube and search Biblical Anarchy, you'll be able to hop onto that. But that's all I have as far as formalities and typical YouTuber podcast plugging. I have a fellow libertarian YouTuber who's also as his podcast name suggests, also a dad. We've interacted a lot on social media, but never had a formal conversation before. So my guest tonight is DL Cummings of the Liberty Dad Pod. So DL, how are you doing tonight?
Very well. Can't complain.
Well, that's always good. I'm sure. I mean, if I gave you enough time, I'm sure you could find a couple things to complain about. I mean,
I am a libertarian.
Yes.
So, there's always something in my back pocket.
Sure. Right. It's like instead of with libertarians, like if you were dating, instead of having topics of like fun conversations, it's like a bunch of cards of like different things that we can complain about.
Mm-hmm.
So DL, you and I, I feel like I followed you for a while. I sometimes tune into your show while I'm on my way to work. It's nice having a libertarian who does stuff in the mornings a lot. You have a nice prime time spot there on the morning run. I feel like I agree with you more often than I disagree with you.
Okay. That's cool. A good start for the night.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure how much we agree or disagree on the topic we have for tonight. My views are in flux on tonight's topic. For those of you who haven't seen the title yet or didn't know what we're here to talk about tonight, it's related to Chase Oliver and his presidential candidacy. He got the nomination for the Libertarian Party back in D.C. In May at the National Convention. One of the more heated conventions, and this is turning out to be, I think, one of the more heated, or at least like internally heated, controversial races. Although I'm not sure. See, I feel like I don't know how much longer you've been in the party than I am, so I could be totally wrong. It seems to me that this race is more contentious internally among libertarians than prior ones, but I could be wrong. Maybe there's one that's worse, so I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I didn't really start paying attention beyond local until close to maybe 2020, somewhere around there. I got involved in 2017, but it was pretty much local, and then I kind of drifted my way into the state. And then eventually I made my way to local. So 2020 was my first foray, and I didn't know anybody at the time. So I didn't really have any knowledge of personalities. I came in fresh, and I was just like, anybody I talked to, clean slate with me, good to go. And then from there, I've, kind of formulated my perspectives of different individuals. So I can't really say. Even during the Joe Jorgensen campaign, I was, relatively insulated from it. And then a lot of the problem is even the stuff that I did see online. Again, I didn't know personality, so I didn't even know who I was talking to, and I could be talking to an egg, or watching somebody with some weird avatar or whatever. And so I didn't know I didn't really say like, man, this is really how people in the Libertarian Party feel, because I didn't know who was actually. I had no knowledge of it whatsoever. So I can't say.
Yeah, that's fair. I would say I got around. I think my first convention was 2019, so we probably joined pretty close to around the same time. Yeah, this race. I mean, I'm sure there's other races in the past. Like I know, I can't imagine that there wasn't some controversy around people like Bob Barr getting the nomination.
Mm.
But I also don't think. I mean, I could be wrong, but no one, to my knowledge, has brought forth any evidence to the idea that I think this is the first time I can think of where we have like multiple state affiliates who are like formally refusing to put a candidate on their ballot. So I think it's pretty significant. My my hair's fine. Yeah, I'm a fidgeter, and
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to. I didn't get a chance. I was rushing. I didn't get to do my vanity look before I hopped on. You got the hat on, DL, so you don't have to worry about that. Um,
Also, also,
well, there you go. Yeah. I guess it's easier that way. You don't have to worry
right.
about it as much.
Just
I'm
gotta
also
shave every now and then.
I was like I'm overdue for a haircut. So my wife went to beauty school and she doesn't do it for a living anymore. She's a full
Mhm.
time mom, but she cuts all of her hair. But she's 9 months pregnant, so finding a time to schedule an appointment for a haircut isn't
Mhm.
top on the priority list right now. Um, yeah, so I guess let's dive into the stuff regarding Chase. I mean, we'll start with kind of like the low hanging fruit, and then we'll kind of get into the where we might disagree more. Uh, would it be fair to say, like, I want to figure out how much we agree or disagree. I understand you're supporting Chase, but would
Mhm.
you at least tend to agree that maybe there are things about Chase as a candidate that aren't ideal, maybe not your favorite thing, and uh, I don't think he was your preferred candidate. I could be wrong. I don't remember you really sharing his stuff around. So, I
Mhm.
mean, can you at least understand maybe, even if you think people should get on board now, would you understand why people would not be thrilled? Like, Chase isn't their number one choice in terms of a,
Mhm.
a candidate to represent the Libertarian banner this year.
So he was not my number one choice and not even my number two. Somewhere around three. Once you get around three, it was really flexible. I didn't really put a lot of effort into, who is my staunch third. As far as, you know, do I agree that there are things that are unappealing? Absolutely. Absolutely. And then can I understand? Um, I want to say yes and no. I can kind of yes understand. I think the biggest problem that I come to the table with is that, at least from the social media vantage point, which is limited. Okay. Um, I remember, and I tweeted this out before, like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, everybody was like, anti-war is the biggest thing. That's our cause. That's our big thing. Chase wins, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, he likes transing kids, and I'm like, wait, what happened? What happened to the anti-war position? Right, that people were so fervently and adamantly proclaiming was their number one issue. And I remember people I mean, I don't remember the specific post or specific people, but I do remember reading a lot of people saying, like, we need to stop the possibility of World War III. And I remember that for a very specific reason. When we went into this election with, with all the different candidates, I was not nearly as anti-war as many might like me to be. I mean, I was, but not like to the point where I was making vociferous arguments against war. And then as I started watching like Dave Smith and, like, just learning more, and I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, like we definitely, like, whatever anti-war position I had just got stronger, right? Hearing all the different arguments from people. And I made several videos myself, like, this is why I'm anti-war, because I realized this actually fits with everything that I already believe with. I just didn't realize
Hmm.
how anti-war I actually, or how vocal about being anti-war I should be. So that's the biggest challenge for me to reconcile, is that a lot of there seems to be a lot of people that was their thing, and then all of a sudden it seems to have, and look, the issues that he has are not at all related to anti-war. They're not even close.
Hmm.
The issues that I oppose, that I disagree with him on. So that's kind of where I am. So I kind of understand, yes, kind of not. And just to reiterate, I do agree that there are some problematic issues. And then what was the first one? Forgot the first one. I was trying to go back. But anyway,
If he
you
was
know,
your number one
so
candidate, I think was the other,
oh,
which you
yes,
already
yeah,
said
yeah,
he wasn't. Yeah.
he wasn't my number one candidate, actually.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's kind of what I figured, which I can respect where you're coming from. And I've been in similar positions myself, even as someone who used to be especially partisan within the Mises Caucus circles. I'm still friendly with the Mises Caucus. I'm a member, but I haven't been an organizer in, I don't know, I'm probably coming up on 8 months, 10 months, something like that. And I'd been slowly decreasing my activity for a while anyway. But even when I was like staunchly with the Mises Caucus, I remember actually, this is funny. One of my first interactions with Dave Smith was being critical of his lack of support for George Jorgensen,
Mhm,
because I made a very similar argument to what you did. I was like, listen, Joe's not my favorite candidate, but we always had been saying, like, Dave, you said in your debate with Nick Sarwark that we need a candidate who's anti-war and anti-Fed. And the problems with the Bill Weld Gary Johnson ticket was that it was not staunchly or even consistently anti-war and anti-Fed. So now
mhm,
we have a ticket that was, and you're not supporting it. I was frustrated with that, and I disagreed with Dave's decision to not support Jorgensen over what amounted to some like, bad tweets from her staffers regarding like, woke virtue signaling,
mhm,
stuff that I'm not a fan of, but I was like, and it pales in comparison to the things that we're criticizing Chase about currently, I think. Like,
mhm,
so I can kind of understand the sentiment that you have, and I've been there myself. Um, Maybe where I'd have a little bit of pushback, or at least like I want to get your thoughts on it, because again, I'm I'm I, I'm sympathetic to that because war is my number one issue. It
mhm,
always has been, even from the time before I was a libertarian. When I was on the left, I was like a Bernie Sanders anti-war leftist.
mhm.
Like, I consumed like the Young Turks. I would have resonated a lot with guys like uh crap, blanking on his name, Jimmy Dore,
Okay.
and whatnot. So, anti, I was kind of like, anti establishment, anti
Mhm,
corporation, what stuff like that. And part of what led me to libertarianism was that after Donald Trump, the left abandoned all those things for Trump
mhm.
derangement syndrome and
Right.
actually, becoming rather cucked for corporations and things like that, and things
Right.
like that. So that led me to libertarianism. But anti-war has always been like my number one political issue. And after watching that presidential debate the other night, I was just like, man, these guys are so bad on the economy, on spending, and
Mhm,
so bad on war and interventionism and Israel and all these things. And like Chase is at least decent to good, maybe even bordering on great on some of those things. And I
mhm,
would prefer to have a candidate interjecting the messaging that I want to see on those issues into this campaign. And so there's part of me that after I watched that debate, I was like, man, I almost feel like I just need to, suck it up and, hold my nose and go support this guy. It in a way that I can. It would be tough. I'd have to,
mhm.
you know, be pretty consistent with voicing my disagreements because they're strong disagreements. But let me give you the other perspective, which is I've argued before. I think anti-war is a very important position, and I get your point that like, well, if this is our number one issue and Chase is good on it, shouldn't that matter more than anything? But a concern I have is tying the anti-war message from the libertarian banner, especially, to some of Chase's more problematic positions.
Mhm,
Like, I don't necessarily find myself relishing the idea of giving like cheering on or supporting Chase getting on bigger platforms,
mhm,
having people check him out, and then having this association with his anti-war rhetoric with his positions on, like gender affirming care for
mhm,
children being the number one thing. And then he's also too many other times kind of foot and mouth on other issues that maybe it's not as jarringly bad, but like for example, like there was that time where he made a tweet about like all labor having value. There's been times where he, you know, even currently today kind of like makes messages that seem to be just sort of like carrying water for certain parts of the progressive message in that side of the regime. And
Mhm.
it's just I'm torn. It's like, yes, I want the anti-war message out there, but do I want to like one of the objections you hear a lot from people on the right, especially when you get into like, opposing the war in Israel and stuff like that, is they go, "Oh, well, this is all just like leftist, insanity, right?" Because they see the college protests and stuff.
Right.
Well, it almost seems like Chase is almost going to be leaning into that misconception and stereotype, and I don't know if that's worth it. To me, it seems like a gamble at least, and I'm
Mhm.
not sure. It's like I'm not sure if I'm holding the dice. I'm like I'm not sure I want to let those dice roll, at least on my
Right.
end in terms of my support. So what are your thoughts on that?
So let me throw a parallel at you. You're a Christian, right? All right, cool.
Yes.
I used to be tongue tied. I used to be an evangelical when I was in my like teens and 20s. Okay. We don't need to go into all the details on that, but I was. So I'm very familiar with the church scene, if you will. Um, you don't seem to have a problem identifying as a Christian despite people like Jesse Duplantis. Um, now, of course, I draw a blank on the names, but many of the other people who have kind of exploited, in a way, Christianity for their benefit. So, I bring up him because there was him and some other people were talking about like, hey, we bought this new plane, and they say all kind of crazy things. And there's always been somebody who gets the media attention in the
Sure. Yeah.
Christian world, and they misrepresent it. And this is one of the things that I actually point to on the regular. I point out that when I was an evangelical, I didn't get an opportunity to I didn't have a say in who somebody else interacted with or heard from before I get to speak to them. So therefore, I started at that time to just say, like, I'm going to disassociate this idea that what I identify as and in the things that I believe in are going to be driven by somebody that I don't particularly care for or maybe disagree with. Okay. And so I think the first thing is to recognize, and this is a problem that I've seen for years now. And it's funny because I used to give the non-Mises crowd. So I kind of split the party into like Mises and non-Mises. This very, very generic. It's not quite accurate, but it's the easiest way to kind of divide people. Um, and so I kind of a long time ago, I would say, like, look, you know, you don't get a chance. I mean, you do get a say in our party. I mean, because you have delegates and whatnot, but you don't necessarily get a say in the speech of others. So I would frequently defend people like Dave Smith. People would say like, "Hey, how come you had Nick Fuentes on? How come you talked to this guy?" And I was like, "That's not your voice. You don't get a say in that. You need to be able to deal with whatever comes about." And I feel like the big Achilles heel in our party is that, again, going with this dichotomy of Mises, non-Mises, is that you have the non-Mises who will hear a message from the Mises crowd and they will get all flipped out and they'll act as if, libertarianism is dead and they can't speak about it to any of their friends now. And I used to criticize them and say, like, look, you got to learn to deal with that. And then now I feel like it's the shoe is on the other foot. I feel like now I'm telling the Mises crowd, I'm like, look, you lost for, regardless of whether you think you should have, or there was something nefarious or whatever, you lost. And right now you've got the guy who's not your guy running around and representing. And he does say some things. I mean, I've seen some tweets even lately. I'm like, dude, seriously, I'm out here defending you. And this is like, come on, man.
It was funny, like
But
right after
also,
it was funny, like right after the post I made where I was kind of like, maybe I could try to support him. Then someone
right,
was like, look at this. And I was like, oh man.
right. But here's the thing. I think that people, I think when it comes to voting, we put too much stock into what happens on Twitter. because at the end of the day, like, I don't remember the numbers at the moment, but the majority of the population is not really on Twitter. They're not really driven by Twitter.
Sure.
When I talk to people all the time, and like I've met people, friends that know I'm a libertarian, and they don't know about Dave Smith, right? Like, and he's got way more name recognition than I think Chase Oliver does. But there are people that don't know who he is. And so I think that we get a little misled because we're what they call terminally online. We're online
Yeah.
so often that this becomes our frame of reference, but it is an inaccurate frame of reference.
Yeah.
And
So
so I'm not as worried about necessarily what gets said. And this has been, and I've been like this with New Hampshire. I've been like this with Joe Jorgensen, with anybody that tweets anything that I'm not particularly a fan of. I've been like, it's not really that big of a deal, folks. And so I'm kind of being consistent now.
sure. And there's a part of me that agrees with you. I wonder if there's two things.
Mhm,
One, um, I do think there's a slight difference between saying, well, you need to be able to tolerate other people who share a like a space with you, that they
mhm,
have a right to say things that you might disagree with, that might be a little bit, I don't know, like different when we're talking about the person we're putting up as the banner holder for the
mhm,
party and the movement. Like I think it's fair to maybe be like, and that would have been fair for Dave Smith too. Like it's one thing for Dave just to be a party member and someone who kind of supports, but if
mhm,
he would have become the guy holding the banner, then the criticisms, they would have been warranted. Now, I think that it would have been easier to defend Dave than Chase, but at the very least, it would be expected. Now, the other thing though is you made the comparison to Christianity, but I agree, but I think the problem there is that yeah, there's a lot of Christians who I don't think do a good job representing Christianity, but I'm rather critical of them. Like I
mhm.
don't just go, well, we're all just Christians, and so let's work. No, like I mean, I have a little bit of ecumenical spirit with I actually have a lot of ecumenical spirit with a lot of Christians, but there are some who are, I think, very problematic. There's like your Joel Osteens, there's your um
That was the other name I was looking
some
for.
yeah, there's certain Christian nationalist types who go too far.
Mhm,
There's Christians on the left that I don't like and on the right. And I think that them and their ideas do need to be strongly pushed back and scrutinized. And I'm sure you would even agree within libertarianism that there has to be some sort of gatekeeping mechanism. I mean, even if we have, and I agree, we should generally have a low threshold
mhm.
or a higher tolerance for things. But like if we have active communists trying to say they're libertarian, then we have to, like, we have to be able to draw a line somewhere and be like, no, this is actually in, strong opposition to the party platforms and to the philosophy. So, and I think again that comes much more into play when we're talking about the person who's our nominee. Now, he did win the nomination,
Mhm.
so I guess you could say, well, he won, so the guy who wins, and you just have to accept that. Um, I won't get into if the state affiliates have to or not, because that's like a whole
Right,
legalese
right,
thing, which I'm not
right.
even. I'm not well informed enough to even have an opinion on that, and B, I I don't even know if it would be like a consistent answer, because I feel like the 4 or 5 states that have done things have kind of taken a different tact each time, and they probably
Mhm,
have different. So, but that's besides the point. Um, but just in terms of if we should be actively embracing him and promoting him, or if some of his views are so bad that like I'm not unwilling to say, hey, maybe the delegates got it wrong,
mhm.
right? Like, yeah, sure. That like, and this, I guess, gets back into, even though I have some disagreements with the Mises Caucus, I tended to agree that the party needed to move in a different direction culturally, strategically, and if if uh if the delegates came up with Chase as the, like, this is the guy who's the best person for us. I mean, I don't even know if that's accurate. Like that gets into democracy and the voting methods of the Libertarian National Convention, which is the sort of like, you know, I don't know what the exact, it's not exactly ranked choice. It's like
Hmm.
round, uh, you keep doing different rounds. Cause like if it was a strict ranked choice, people would just put in one ballot and then you would just
Sure.
run it off all at once. This is, I don't know the technical term for it, but it's a little bit different. So there's a lot of different variables in there. Um,
So let's make it easy then.
yeah, sure.
Have you read his platform on his website?
I have.
Okay. Which item on his platform would you not want to have the to have influence over the Republicans or the Democrats right now, Biden
Uh,
or Trump?
so he doesn't get into, from my memory, any of the really problematic stuff on his views on gender
Hmm.
on his platform, which I appreciate. That's not like a feature of his platform. Um,
Nor
his
should it be. Nor should it be
right,
because it is
right.
not a federal issue.
Um, the uh, the stuff on immigration,
Hmm.
I feel like that, like I am more partial to the idea that libertarians should either not talk about the immigration issue or try to attempt a nuance.
Hmm.
And Chase's feels like he's maybe trying to attempt some nuance, but it reminds me a little bit of what the old abortion plank used to be, where it's just kind of like nuancing it, but then still taking a side. And I don't know, I am kind of the opinion that with the current immigration crisis we have going right now, that it's not good enough commentary to just kind of recite old Cato lines about, immigration's good for the economy and there's no problem at the border. It's like there's clearly a state created problem. I
Hmm.
would tend to understand people who go, maybe the state's not the solution. But like, if you're going to talk about immigration, I feel like you need something that doesn't come across as tone deaf in the current uh, political climate, and Chase's position
So
kind of
is
comes
Ellis
across that
Island
way to me.
actually tone deaf? Because let me tell you from my experience. My wife is an immigrant. She comes from Indonesia. And she when we got married, she was a green card holder. And then it wasn't until she wanted to bring her mother over that she actually got naturalized. And part of this process, we ended up spending like $4 or $5,000 on lawyers to do paperwork
Yeah,
to
no, that's
bring a
ridiculous.
70-some-year-old woman over here when her brother passed away and her dad had already passed away. So her mother was alone. So we brought her over here to live with us, right? This is the immigration system that we have. It affects not only people like me who, are in a decent position financially, but it affects other people as well. And so when I look at Chase's position, I say, what I see is he talks about an Ellis Island style immigration system. We've already done that. I don't think that's a terribly difficult sell to Americans, to say, like, look, we've already been here. We've done this. And this is how the country was built, right? Was in a sense. Not entirely. I mean, obviously, a lot of Americans, and we're not going to get into the details, but effectively, this is part of what made America great is that people could come over, and it worked very, very well. I mean, there were problems. I mean, there's always problems,
Yeah,
right?
but like I don't even disagree with that in an idyllic sense. But my issue is that there's almost two different issues
Mhm.
when we're talking about immigration. I don't want to get bogged too much on this, but
Sure.
there is immigration policy for what does it take to come here legally, what does it take to become a citizen, things like that. And I would probably tend to agree with you and even Chase on a lot of that stuff. But then there is the crisis on the border, which is kind of a related but sort of unique problem that I don't know if you just like, because to me it seems like there is a sort of targeted intentional effort by the state, more through like probably NGOs and different probably foreign entities as well, that are conspiring to import a lot of people here and to have them come into the country in the most chaotic way possible. That I don't know if you just like signed a bill into tomorrow kind of enacting Chase's immigration policy, that even if it passed, I don't know if it really changes the problems being created by these other forces at play, that are kind of not even just a problem of legislation, that are a problem of bureaucracy, they're a problem of uh, also the ability of local, governments to have some
Mm.
sovereignty and state involvement. So it's a very complicated problem. And I don't begrudge libertarians kind of falling on different spots on this issue, but I just feel like Chase is sort of like he's talking about immigration as if we live in 2005 and not in 2024. Like I
So
think the
can you
border issue
quantify?
was a lot more was a lot different 20 years ago than it is today. Like I think it's hard to not see that there's kind of been a ramp up in this problem.
So quantify that. Like when you say like there's it's more of a problem today than it was at some point in the past, whatever point you choose.
I mean, I don't have the
Quantify that.
numbers on hand, but I think from what I remember,
Mhm.
it's like we used to have I think it's like anywhere from like a 5 to 10 time increase in terms of the number of people crossing the border. Like I think it used to be like, maybe around 100,000 or maybe a little
Right.
bit lower than that, but now it's like degrees of magnitude, higher than that. It's not just like a 10,000 or 20,000 increase.
Right.
It's like
Of
two,
course.
three, 4 or 5. It's somewhere around. It's hard to like get exact numbers on this, but it's
Sure.
clear that like I think
Or what
it's
should it be?
well, okay. Well, so I'm an ANCAP, so like to me that doesn't even make sense as a question.
Well, okay, but we're talking about the world that we live in now,
The world that we
right?
live in now, like what
What
should
should
it
it be?
be?
What would be an
Um,
appropriate, you know, see, this is my problem with this argument. A lot of people will say, "Oh, we're being flooded." I don't know what being flooded means. Second of
well,
all,
it's just not
who is
natural.
flooding? Are they all like nefarious people? Are they all terrorists? And how do we know this?
Well,
What are the
I think
numbers?
so
But I
I
think people
understand
are
your
just
point.
working on abstract.
I understand your point, but I think it's even less about like if a bunch of people were just coming here and and you could trace it to like some kind of natural phenomenon. Like I don't know, let's say we had a new modern gold rush, right?
Mhm.
And then there was like an increase because people were coming here to work in mines or or a bunch of jobs that were created there, and like you could track it through the market, then I'd be largely in support of that. But when it feels like governments are kind of artificially messing with demographics, which there's historical precedents for this. I mean, we saw a lot of this happen in Eastern Europe, which not just caused problems back then, but it's directly related to the problems going on there right now. Same with Israel even. That was almost like a concentrated kind of like there was not to the same degree, but there was some state intervention in terms of moving people and demographic changes and stuff. And that's what my concern with. Like I don't like as a libertarian, I understand the arguments about the free movement of people from an economic standpoint, but then
Mhm.
like as also the libertarian, we should understand that when the state's picking winners and losers and artificially increasing demand or supply anywhere in the economy, including the movement of people, that's not
Oh, there you go.
something I think we as
Froze up.
libertarians should just kind of like be leaning into and being like, yeah, this is great. We should actually just open the border more. So I
But
don't know if that
isn't
makes
that our
sense.
answer everywhere else? Isn't that our answer everywhere else where we say, hey, the government is artificially doing things? Give it to the free market, open things up, allow people to do as they please. Isn't that our answer everywhere else? And why should it not be the same here?
Well, I don't know that's our answer everywhere else. So, like for example, when it comes to like the military-industrial complex, because like there's things libertarians, and maybe you're not an ANCAP, but like I think even a minarchist would agree that there are some things we want to abolish and some things we want to
Mhm.
privatize. I don't want to privatize the military-industrial complex. I don't want to just like, hey, instead of the government directly funding the funneling money to these different countries and funneling weapons and stuff, let's just make it all private corporations doing that and cheer
Mhm.
that on or something like that. Like I don't know that it's always just like um and I think our answer is generally that the government should stop intervening, right? But to me, it seems like if you're
Mhm.
opening the border, you're not actually addressing the underlying issue that the government is intervening in the problem. So
So, so
like even
what's
like let me give you an
interesting
example.
is
I'm pro
sure.
gun, right? I'm pro Second Amendment. I
Mhm.
have no
Mhm. Mhm.
problem with gun
As
ownership.
we all should
But
be.
if right, but if the government was like funneling weapons in to high crime areas like and giving them to like drug gangs and stuff, I'm not sure I would be like you know Well, the problem there is that the government should get out of the way and we should just be private. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like that's kind of like missing the point almost. And like you're looking at things at a granular level and not uh, kind of understanding the narratives at play.
So, here's what's interesting. In 2010, the founder of our party ran against John McCain, and his position on immigration was basically Chase's position now. And his argument when he was in a debate with John McCain was, if we make it easier for people that are, good people, and that's, that, like, what does that mean exactly? We could have that argument, but like, we make it easier for people that want to come here and, assimilate and get jobs. And, they just like, look, my country sucks. Your country's awesome. I want to come over there. Then it frees up our resources to deal with the bad actors. But so long as we have these strict regulations, now our resources are devoted to like a large majority of the people that are coming over. Well, that's the same problem that we have like with the drug war, right? We if we're dealing with, like, let's just say that we remove, let's say on the drug war, we don't get rid of like some of the nastier drugs like heroin and stuff like that, right? But we say, hey, we're going to ease up on some of the drugs, like marijuana, shrooms, something like that. We do the same thing, right? We would actually free up resources to deal with some of the worst problems. And that applies anywhere else that we look as libertarians. And it's, whenever there's government intervention, the answer for libertarians is to say, get the government out, let the free market work. With
Sure,
the
I
exception,
agree.
of course, when there's like, violent crime and, things along that nature, right? So I look at it and I say, the act of somebody, and I'm not an open borders type. Like, and when I say, so just to be clear, so that we're on the same page here, when I say open borders, I tend to mean fully open. When I say closed borders, I mean something stricter than Ellis Island, and then I explicitly say Ellis Island to mean somewhere in the middle.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's those are the terms how I
And I
phrase
don't,
them,
yeah, and I don't
you know,
disagree with that.
and
I
I'm
just
more of an
think,
Ellis Island kind of person.
yeah, I've often said open a bunch of different Ellis Islands along the border, and you could even combine that, like, and if you could even say like, and if there are quotas or something like that, you could also offer expedited uh movement for people who are sponsored by like a corporation, kind of like
Mhm,
incorporating some of the Hoppian sponsorship ideas, which I think also have some you know can be part of a pragmatic solution as well. But again, I think that so that's removing government. Like I agree, like remove government involvement, but like that's removing government involvement from one aspect of the equation. And I'm just saying there's government involvement in these other aspects, but I don't think Chase is speaking to that. Like and that's I think going to be a tough sell, not even just for right of center voters. There's a lot of
mhm,
left of center voters who are very concerned about what clearly just seems like a very fabricated problem. And of course, that's half the problem is that I don't trust. Uh, I always get the dilemma of the state's creating this problem. I don't know how we solve it because it seems like we'd be having to go to the people who were incentivized to keep the current, like, worst of both worlds
mhm,
dilemma we have right now going. So that's why I tend to think it's probably better to focus hard on more of like a 10th Amendment perspective and to uh, take this away from the federal government and have individual states uh, have their own policies. Of course, that's going to bring up its own challenges as well. There's trade-offs
mhm.
no matter which way you look. I understand where you're coming from. Again, like Chase's position on immigration would not be like a deal breaker for me. It's
Okay.
just not something I'm not especially happy with. And to your point, like I'm looking at his platform again.
Mhm,
A lot of it's, typical, like, and the death penalty and the war on drugs, civil liberties and war, um, things like that, which are all mostly fine. Um, his position on abortion, not really good enough for me from a Christian perspective,
mhm,
but that's something where I think that's more of a state. Like, I don't think the federal government should be solving abortion. That is something he said, though. He said he supports like a codification of Roe, I think, at the federal level, which I think is immensely problematic.
Mhm.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
So, when it comes to well, so I can only go by, well, I don't want to say I can only go. I will only go by necessarily what his platform says. Now, I know he has some tweets here and there, and I don't always agree with them. But I think the most tried and true position to work from is what he says on his platform. So one of the things that he points out, he says, and I'm looking at it too, and I'm reading. He says, I recognize the complexity of this issue and how there can be good faith positions on both sides of the abortion debate. Totally agree. I think there's good faith positions. Not everybody necessarily is good faith, but there are good faith positions, even if I disagree with them. He said, I will work to encourage states to decriminalize abortions. Now, I like that line because he's like, I will work to encourage states. So he's clearly recognizing there's a limit on federal power. And he's like, this should be at the state level. I'll encourage him to try to do this. But then he comes down and it says, I like this. I will encourage states to incentivize alternatives to abortion, such as adoption, easing burdensome regulations, so on and so forth. Right. So I'm like, all right, it sounds like he's on one hand, like, okay, he supports women's right to choose abortion, however you want to frame it. But on the other hand, he seems very sympathetic to the idea that we can do better than abortion. So even if he's like, even if
Well,
he's
are
all
you
about abortion, he seems to support this idea that we can do better than that.
are
And I'm
you at
good with
all worried that, like, I get your point about the distinction between tweets and what's on his platform, but are you at all worried that what he says in tweets could come out in his interviews as he potentially gets more interviews? Because I guess that's my concern, is that it doesn't seem like he has just stuck to his platform in the messaging that I have seen,
that.
including when he's being interviewed by people like Liz Wolfe on Reason.
Mhm,
And so, and that's worth pointing out too. Like, it doesn't even seem to me that it's just like a Mises Caucus thing. Like, even there's people like Liz Wolfe and others who seem to
mhm,
be like, yeah, I don't know about Chase because he doesn't seem to be consistent. Even being interviewed by people who might more or less be on his team, but
mhm.
his answers can be a little all over the place, not always keeping to just kind of the
Right.
simplicity of his platform. So that's a concern of mine, is that, like, maybe if all he was doing was just repeating the platform ad nauseum, I wouldn't have much of an issue. But he seems to kind of go off script a lot in these interviews, and he lets his personal leanings and opinions on some of these more controversial things bleed through, which I don't again, I don't think that's the best thing in the world. And then I'm especially worried that his most problematic views, even though they're not on his platform page,
Mhm,
I'm worried that if he, I mean, like, I don't know, my best case scenario, I guess there would be a best case scenario that maybe he gets a bunch of media attention
mhm.
and it's all mostly positive and no one presses him on these things. And it's just kind of like isolated to social media that people are
Right.
hearing about his
I'm glad you
problematic
pointed that out.
views. That's possible,
Mhm.
but I guess,
It's not possible. It's already happened.
well, but okay, but,
No, it's already
eh,
happened.
I'm not saying it
He
hasn't already
already ran for
happened, but
Senate, and he
we're
has
not,
been on many interviews. He has been on interviews since so far. Now, it's not to say that it won't ever happen,
because we're not
but
even 2
but
months
it
in yet is my point. Like, it
but it
could
hasn't
happen.
happened so far, and I think there's a good reason for that. Again, going back to earlier comment where I said what people see and talk about on Twitter is not necessarily what gets talked about in the mainstream media. Um, Liz Wolfe, I think she did a good job of pushing him hard. And I have acknowledged publicly that while I'm supporting Chase, this should be the most difficult 6 months of his life in regards to any position or anything that he has sought out. Okay. So it should be the most difficult 6 months for him. He should be getting heartburn every single day and popping antacids. Okay. Maybe not literally, but I mean, effectively, this should be tough for him. And I want this to be tough, and I'm glad that Liz did that. But Liz, I don't believe. I mean, we pretty much all agree that reason doesn't really reflect a lot, in terms of libertarianism. But I don't think they necessarily reflect what the mainstream and what the average voter cares about. Because I just saw him on, what was it, C-SPAN? He did like a 30-minute interview, Not a single one of these positions came up, not with the interviewer and not with the callers who called in. They called in, they were talking about the economy and war and everything else. They were talking about the issues for which people can actually get behind, libertarians can get behind
All right.
Chase
Well,
on.
let me ask you this, like, because I almost feel like there's a catch-22 here, maybe,
Mhm,
which is that if, because like it's hard, so like if Chase maybe has like a Joe Jorgensen level performance and basically doesn't get a lot of huge media, and it just kind of peters out around 1%, and I would probably tend to agree it's not likely he's going to be grilled on some of these issues and have them be like go viral in a bad way. But if people are pushing for Chase and they're like, well, we need to try to get him more media and bigger media, and to their credit, during a year where we're doing a rerun of like
mhm,
the worst matchup we've ever had
mhm,
for the presidential race, like I can kind of see how Chase is a very young candidate with a stark contrast to two very unpopular candidates. I worry that there's a chance he might get more exposure. But then as he gets more exposure, people might start digging to see
mhm.
what is in the closet. And then
Sure.
in that scenario, it does seem more likely to me that people are going to press him harder on some of these issues. And I guess and I don't know, like I'm still torn. Like part of me thinks that I have like two choices in front of me. One is to basically not support him, to
Mhm.
at least give him credit for the right things he does say, but to just kind of basically like, yeah, I'm not voting for him. I'm not going to go out there and really try to make arguments for him or give him a lot of exposure. Option two is I guess what you're doing, which is like I'm going to support him, but I'm just going to be very vocal about my disagreements.
Mhm.
And I just wonder, like, is there ever a deal breaker to that formula? And I don't know where that line would be. I could think of some reductio ad absurdums that I'm sure we'd agree with. Like, imagine if we had a candidate who had all the same positions as Chase did, but the really like the skeleton in the closet was like, uh, they were pro. I don't know if I can say this on YouTube. Uh, pro MAPs, right?
Okay.
Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I
Just
mean?
say it.
Like,
I did a whole episode on it. It's still there.
okay, so yeah, I mean, like if you had a candidate that was like pro, like I'm anti-war, I'm anti-Fed, I want to decrease spending, and also we should lower the age of consent to like 10 or something like
Right.
crazy like that. Like, I mean, I would hope to God we would that the delegates would not nominate someone like that.
Right.
But I'm just again, I think we would agree in that reductio ad absurdum that like even if he's good on all these issues, there can potentially be deal breakers, and then we're just kind of having just like an argument over like, well, where's the line in
Right.
terms of what can be a deal breaker and what wouldn't be?
The deal. Could I speculate on what could be a deal breaker? Yes. Are there deal breakers? Sure. Do I necessarily know what they are? Not necessarily. The things that have come up, I don't see them as deal breakers because I don't see that they matter nearly as much as libertarians like to believe. And I'm a big critic of my libertarian peers. I think they get worked up about things that the rest of the world isn't talking about. Right?
See,
Like
I've heard
the
this claim,
interviews
but I
that he's
just don't
been on
know.
that have asked him about these deal breaker topics, they've been Austin Peterson and they've been Liz Wolfe. Those are either, depending on how you want to define them, they're at least libertarian adjacent. Okay.
Well, hold
If
on.
not
Has he
libertarian
been
standing up.
interviewed by anybody who would have a problem with those positions that he has? Like, has he had any, people to the right of? So, because I agree, like, if you go to your average left of center voter, they don't really see an issue with a lot of this, kind of this kind of woke agenda being pushed on
Mhm.
children and the idea of children transitioning and being on hormones and whatnot. So yeah, there's like a large to your point, there's a large part of the country and even the media that I'm sure doesn't care about this stuff, but there's a
Right.
whole other side that does. And
Sort of. They sort of
I
care. They sort of
I
care.
mean, it was a
Let's
big
be honest.
issue. It was a
Let's
big
be
issue in
honest.
my county. I think it's going to vary depending on where you live in the
People care
country.
because it's the new shiny culture war issue. But I'm going to be honest. The most of the people that I see talking about gender affirming care, and we can take off surgery because Chase doesn't support it. Nobody else does, in our circles. So we don't really need to include that because he doesn't support it. I don't support it. You don't support it. Most everybody that either supports Chase or doesn't support him, they don't support it either. So that's really a non-issue. So now we're back down. Now we're down to pharmaceuticals, right? And I did a whole podcast where I talked about this and I said, look, people have already accepted the idea that we drug up our children. That has been socially acceptable for decades. And it's even been acceptable for the puberty blockers. Like, I don't know if people realize this, but puberty blockers were given decades ago for children, not for just precocious puberty, which is the labeled use for it, if you will, but it was given to kids who were short. And not to me because I'm still short, but it was given to kids who were short. And
What was
now
even the logic behind that?
I'm
What?
sorry.
What was the
So
logic behind that?
the logic was, if we delay puberty, then you get a chance to grow a little bit more before you hit puberty. Because once you hit puberty, apparently, and I don't know the details exactly, but that kind of limits the amount of growth that you're going to see.
Hmm.
And so and here's the thing, I see this all the time and it just infuriates me. People are like, oh, chemical castration. If people actually bothered to do their research, they would find out that chemical castration is not the complaint that a lot of people that were on puberty blockers decades ago are complaining about now. They're complaining about bone thinning, joint pain, fibromyalgia, things along that line. So
Their
where,
voices.
yeah. And so I look at it and I say, where were you when people were talking about Ritalin? Where were you when they were talking about putting our children on SSRIs? We've already accepted the idea. This is just the newest thing
That
in the
might be a
long
valid
line of stuff.
criticism for some people, but I'm like staunchly against all of those things for children.
Right.
So
And so I think this goes further. Like, I'm against it too. Like, to me, the idea of giving our children SSRIs or Ritalin, I'm like, no, like that should
there's
almost
even too many adults on those things, to be honest.
correct. Correct. I mean,
Yeah.
I am an example of an adult that has been on all of them except for puberty blockers. No hormone, no gender affirming care type medication, but I've been on some of the other ones, and
Same. Yeah.
to some really bad experiences, right? And that's what, before I was even a libertarian, I was like, whoa, I was like, what's going on here? I was like, we can't be giving kids all these kind of crazy drugs. Like, this is insane, right? And so for me, I look at it and I say, I think a lot of libertarians have just jumped on the most current bandwagon. And it's not sufficient for me because society has already accepted this. And we do not have the social or the political capital right now to fight back directly against that. But we can do it indirectly. And I think that Chase does it because I've said before, his positions, his policy positions undermine his
I
personal positions.
I do agree with you. I think I think that is one of the strongest arguments to try to get past some of his problematic positions, is that his positions on healthcare, on the economy,
Mhm.
on the level of government involvement in education and in our lives in general, they all do uh, undermine a lot of these things that we're concerned about. So that is a valid point, and that's one of the things that I've tried to, I don't know, internalize in my attempt to try to to try to make myself more open-minded to, again, like I've been trying to
Mhm.
levy the challenges to you because it's just to, we're putting these ideas to the test. And I a lot of things you've said, I've also thought. I'm just
Mhm.
trying to work them out. And I think you're a good person to work some of this
So
out with. And
let
I
me
agree. There are
lay it
some
out straight for
people.
you.
Well, go
If
ahead.
it weren't for libs of TikTok, I don't think that we'd be talking about gender affirming care in the way that we are now. Because I think that
Well,
libs of TikTok has kind of colored our perception, because you go there and you scroll through, because this happened to me. I was like, I would watch a video and then I watch the next video and then I would see their next tweet. And I was like, oh my God, they got like tons and tons of teachers that are out there trying to basically force gender ideology onto my son, right? Like they're waiting and pray for this. And then of course my son is 5. So we're not doing homeschooling topic for another day. Why? But I went out visiting schools and I wasn't seeing this. And I was like, oh, I was like, I went to all these
Yeah,
schools,
it's definitely going
charter
to depend on where
public
you're at
schools, and,
in the country.
and then I'm like, I'm not seeing this thing. Not to say that they're not there. I know they're there, right? But they're not there in the way that it appears on social media. And that's the problem. We're getting a distorted view because my perspective was like, oh my God, every kindergarten teacher, they just can't wait to get in and talk about their pronouns to my son. And I'm like, I just want him to learn how to write and do math and, the normal things that you're supposed to learn from school. He can figure out the pronouns hanging out with his friends on his own. He doesn't need a teacher who's got, her own issues, or his or her, their, or whatever, their own issues. Right. And this is my criticism. I think that I think that a lot of the criticisms of Chase are social media centric. And when we get out in the real world, they don't matter nearly as much. They matter, but they don't matter in the same way because people aren't talking about them. Not nearly as much.
Hmm. I don't know. I think that's going to be one of those things where your mileage will vary. Like I get the sense from
I mean, if
talking
you're in
to a lot of
California,
different
yes,
people.
versus Florida, right?
Well, I live in Pennsylvania in a red county, but
Mhm,
like the schools here are all just filled with like extremely blue pilled, Democrat registered like
mhm,
activist teachers. Like it's awful. There's actually been like a huge surge in the homeschooling and Christian school and private school numbers
mhm,
in my area over the last few years because people started to see a lot of this stuff uh, during COVID when they started
mhm.
seeing, what their kids were being taught. So again, I think it's going to it's going to probably vary even within states. It's probably going to vary by school district. It's going to vary by like, hiring policies, like what colleges and you know demographics of teachers are you hiring and funneling in. So it's probably going to be like, yeah,
Right.
some places it might seem like it's a really big deal, and other places it might be like, well, it's not happening here at all. So it to people
And
are
I
just going to
think
have
that's where
different
Chase's
perspectives.
position comes in very valuable, right? So he wants to deal with federal backed student loans, not really relevant to the issue of teachers and what they're teaching. He wants, like he's dealing with things at the federal level, but then he says, I want to abolish the Department of Education and, basically allow states to deal with this. Well, guess what? That means when you start disconnecting the power from federal government to the state governments, you start having a little bit more power in the hands of people because you have fewer incentives for schools to do things. I mean, we've all talked about these kind of things, like all the money that comes in from the
Yeah.
federal government, the edicts that come in from the Department of Education, so on and so forth. These things are very powerful. And that's where a lot of the activists go. They go and they try to influence things at the federal or the national level, depending on whether they're talking about a government organization or a non government organization, right? I mean, I talked about this back with, remember the Dr. Seuss kerfluffle that happened? I don't think people realize this, but there was a study that came out. It was something along the lines of, and I'll tie this in. I promise I will. But it was titled something like Dr. Seuss Orientalism and Racism, and or something like that. But it was something along that title. I don't remember the exact details. But the study's authors were self-described CRT scholar activist. That's how they described themselves. They went to the NEA, the National Education Association, which is the largest teacher um, union in the United States, and they said, can you start putting in what we might call more woke books, more social justice books?" And the NEA agreed, and they removed all of Dr. Seuss's books from the now, mind you, Read Across America that they got these books removed from. That was a specific event based on the celebration of Dr. Seuss books, and they removed all of the books and replaced them with social justice. That affected 45 million children, roughly, I think. So we start disconnecting the power from the federal level, from the national level. It's harder for these activists because now they have to fight that fight in every single state. And I know that Donald Trump said he was going to get rid of the Department of Education, but he also laid out a 10-point plan of what he was going to do to improve our schools. And I'm like, well, sir, you are at the federal level, so there's no way that you're totally disconnecting the federal power from that, which means the activists still have somewhere to seek out and influence. So I think that Chase's position, like, again, it undermines his, any of his personal views. And it actually benefits our children because now it forces, if he were to win or if he were to influence at least, right? It
Well,
gets
those are
us
his.
away from the
So
federal power that everybody is seeking.
all right, but so a couple things there. 'Cause I think that those are compelling points, but I guess here's what I'm running up against
Mhm.
mentally. One, this is all well and good, but he's not going to win, so it's not like he can actually affect any of this change anyway.
Sure.
And so then if he's not going to win, what is like the secondary goal of a campaign? It's to try to, grow the party, to
Mhm.
educate people. And I don't know that Chase is well equipped to do that. I know his stated goal is I want to bring people in and retain them for what, like 8 years, 10
Mhm.
years, something like that, which is, you know, that's a noble goal, but I don't know if the type of people he's going to attract will do that. And that comes down to also like what's the kind of person he's going to attract. And I guess like when I see him, I haven't watched every interview, but the interviews I have watched of him, he doesn't really seem to make these points as well as like what you're stating. Like he's not just kind of like uh reading from his platform, like I said before. And so I don't I guess like it's going to vary. There are probably some voters who will hear about him and they will go check out his website. But
Mhm.
I get the sense that for a lot of voters, they vote more kind of like with their gut and by like, they watch what somebody says and kind of like on their first impression of him. And then they might, you know, they might do a little bit of research, but I don't think they're
Mhm.
like going point by point through all of his positions. And so I worry that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be attracted to him and who vote for him, but they're not going to be voting for him for any of his actually good libertarian positions. They might be voting for him because like they're they don't want to
Mhm.
vote for Joe Biden. Uh,
Right.
he might attract some of the anti-war left, and I think that'll be interesting. And I think that might be like I hope uh, that he really leans into that part of his message
Right.
because I think it's the most effective part of his message, and I think he does care about it a lot. But yeah, I'm just a little. I don't know. Like it's always about trade-offs, and
Mhm.
I suppose for me. So here's what it comes down to: is there a strong argument to be out there with like Chase derangement syndrome and trying to tear him down at every corner, like some libertarians are? I'm not. I'm not doing that. I don't think that's especially
Mhm.
warranted. Um, but I can never quite get myself over the hurdle of actually wanting to support him. It's like I can make a lot of arguments and I'll go, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But then I look at the trade offs and I'm like, I don't even see that this is a and maybe you won't have much pushback on this and this isn't really like what you were here to defend, but I can't find myself seeing that there's enough of a like there's not enough stacked on the pro side of the trade-offs
Mhm.
for me to really feel compelled to go support him. Because I feel like there's just not going to be, especially there's not much that I'm going to be able to do. I feel like with the kind of audience I have and the kind of message that I sort of focus on, um, it's going to be really tough to for me to try to uh be out there supporting him, and it would be weird support to be like every other breath be like he's good on this, and then when people bring up, because my audience are the type who will bring up all
Mhm.
of the
Mhm.
things that he's bad on, and so
Sure.
it's gonna be a so anyway. I guess that's kind of where I'm at, is like I can kind of walk myself back away from the edge of a lot of the people who are making this out to be worse than it is, but then I don't know if I quite get myself over the hurdle of like, actually, this is going to be a good campaign, and Chase is a good candidate that I need to go and try to like whip support for to
Right.
people. Like I just don't feel compelled to like go to my coworkers or my church members or my family members other than my leftist sister and
Mhm.
and really be like, go check out Chase Oliver.
Right.
That's it's kind of where I'm landing at. And I think for a lot of people there might be some irrational hatred of Chase, but I think for
Mhm.
a lot of people they kind of come at this from the same angle, whereas like being involved in politics is kind of like the trade-off has to be worth it to them, because they
Mhm.
would otherwise just be inclined to like not vote and to just kind of be a conscientious objector
Right.
to the entire system. If they're going to put their support behind someone, not just with a protest vote, but like out there being vocal, it's got to be someone that like they feel like they can really rally behind, or at the
Mhm.
very least who doesn't come with too many negative trade-offs. And
Right.
maybe the trade-offs aren't as bad as some are selling them, but they're just also not as good as what I think some people are selling them on. Like for let me give you an example.
Mhm.
Lars, as much as I really wasn't a fan of Lars, the strategy Lars was pushing and the kind of messaging and resources he was bringing, I felt like that would have been a different calculus where I could probably say the trade off is worth it. I made for Joe Jorgensen, I
Mhm.
was able to say the trade off was worth it. For Chase, it's like it feels like I'm coming up with like a you know we got to the green and we made the final putt and we came up like a couple feet short of the hole. It's just where I'm emotionally kind of like
Mhm.
mentally at, I guess.
So let's look at a couple things here. Um, let's start with anybody that's just so let's start with the very basic. Chase has to earn, and as any candidate, they have to earn every vote they get. That includes libertarians. Okay. So there's, I don't believe in this idea that you always support the libertarian candidate just because they're a libertarian candidate. Now, there's a slight variance, which we don't need to get into when it comes to like officers of the party. I do believe that, officers should at least support or at least be quiet. And that's a different mechanism there that's going on, because you're literally part of a party that's competing and yada yada. So, but for regular people, just everyday people, if you actually are more inclined to say that, somebody like Trump or Biden or RFK or whoever else
Well, to be clear, I'm
is more
not. I
appealing.
mean,
Right, right, right.
yeah.
But I'm going to do something here. If you're the kind of libertarian that says, look, I don't have any big beef with Chase. I think he's a libertarian, but I just really find the message from this person more appealing. Let's set them aside. Okay, because they're in a different category. They're somebody that said, "Look, this person has appealed to me explicitly." Right. And I think that's an entirely different situation. So now let's talk about the people that are like, look, I might be willing to support Chase except for these things. Okay. So let's talk to that crowd right there, because I think they're entirely different crowds, and you can't talk to them the same way.
That's
So,
basically the crowd I'm in.
right. And so I look and I say, number one, the two biggest things that I heard in the last year and a half, roughly, was anti-war and messaging. Now, messaging isn't. We already kind of talked about anti-war. And we already know, and I think it's pretty much a given that Chase is the most honest anti-war candidate. Like, I know some of them. I mean, Trump just recently came out and was suggesting, not he didn't even suggest it, he outright said it. He said Israel should finish the job, whatever that means. It doesn't sound good to me.
No.
Okay. So as far as I'm concerned, there's not a single anti-war candidate other, at least the major ones, other than Chase. So if you're looking at the top four, Biden, Trump, RFK, or Chase. Chase is the only anti-war candidate. And so I'm like, all right, cool. We've dealt with the anti-war situation. Now let's talk about messaging. Messaging is interesting because it actually relies on us. It's not just the candidate. It is also us as well. And this is what I mean when I earlier said something to the effect of we need to learn to get to work out messaging that we don't necessarily agree with. And the reason for that
I'm
is
bad at that.
because I'm sorry. Well, the
I said
reason
I'm
for
bad at
that,
that.
the reason is for that is because who are the people that tell our friends and family about Chase? We are. I am. I'm the one that tells most of my friends and family they're not libertarian. Like when I'm not at a libertarian event or doing a podcast, I'm probably interacting with people that are not libertarians. Some of them are libertarian leaning, but they're most of them are not. Republicans, some of them Democrats, some of them independents, right? And so I am the person that has to really do the messaging. So there's really no such thing as Chase is our messenger. It's actually me. It's me and it's you and it's anybody that's watching this and it's anybody that's in the party that's talking. We are the messengers. When Gary Johnson was running, a guy that was in our affiliate, he said, the moment I heard Gary Johnson, I knew he wasn't a real libertarian. I was like, okay. Now I could have argued the point and been like, no, but instead, here's what I asked him. I said, how many of your friends and family would have said the same thing? Because if you haven't talked to them to death so that they could basically parrot your positions, then you haven't done the job of messaging. So let me bring that back to Chase now and talking about all this. When I talk to people, number one, I don't bring up the worst elements of his positions, but I do talk to them about his positions that are relevant to my friends and my family. And none of them are talking about the worst ones, right? Like they're talking about the economy, they're talking about war. And so I tell them, I'm like, oh, well, we got a candidate and here's what our candidate believes, blah, 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 blah. Right. And I just I let a sleeping dog lie. And I know it sounds difficult because the libertarians want to be like, oh, I'm so principled and I got to talk about everything. No, you don't.
But isn't
Our
that
job is to move the needle toward liberty. And that doesn't
I
mean that we have to air out our dirty laundry and then go, well, I can't talk about all that because no, you don't defeat yourself. Go out, talk to your friends. And if I'm going to go back to some scripture. If they come back and say, well, what about this? Just like scripture says, you should have an answer. And I don't remember this exact scripture, but you should
be able
have
to
an
make a
answer.
defense. Yeah.
Right. You should be able to make a defense. You should be prepared. And I am prepared to deal with my friends who might say, but wait a minute, he supports transing kids. Well, my first answer is going to be, actually, no, he doesn't. That is a very active thing. And we need to be very clear that there are people who actively want kids to be transed. He is not one of them. He wants people to make this decision within their families, with their doctors. How best can we minimize the destruction that is what I think is gender affirming care? You all right, man?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Oh, okay.
You're good.
How do we minimize that destruction? The number one way that we minimize it is we implement policies that that basically cut it at the core, because the core of those policies is seeking federal or national involvement in some way. And so I'm really on board with the idea of decentralization, which Chase, his positions on his website support a very heavily decentralized government. Well, guess what? We decentralize it. Then me and you and everybody else who are parents that think this is terrible ideas, we can go wave our fist at school board meetings, and we have more power now because they're not so tied to federal government. That's
So
how we win.
I hear all of that. And I guess my worry is just that if I go out and support him now, and I could do all that, and I think that'd be effective. But then if he starts to get bigger media, which I think we kind of agreed, if he gets some bigger media, especially, from platforms that might be more incentivized to dig in the closet, it's not just going to be having a conversation with my family member if they find out through some off chance. If he
Mhm.
has a bad moment on a bigger stage, have I kind of like put my neck out on the line for him, and now that I worry about that. And I'll be completely transparent. I worry
Mhm.
about that not even just from a libertarian perspective, but like I'm someone who has a platform and my audience
Mhm.
trusts me to kind of be honest. And
Sure.
so it's like I kind of feel like I'm not in a good position to and maybe this is a problem with podcasters is sometimes our incentives are a little bit different, but it's like uh I'm it feels a little bit wrong for me to not to kind of like be out there on social media and stuff and like be whipping for Chase and defending him, and then when he has a bad moment then kind of like be trying. It would almost look like I'm trying to save face if that happened later down the road and I didn't lead with it.
Mhm.
I guess that's where my concern is. And so it's a gamble, and I'm just not sure that the gamble is is worth it. But I mean, I could find myself. I mean, I'm happy to. I think where I'm at now, and I'm going to continue to think about it. I've
Mhm.
also said, for the record, that I'm happy to have a conversation with Chase and to see if we can't find some common ground on the issues that I'm concerned with. Um,
Mhm.
I understand he's running a national campaign and doesn't necessarily have the time to go and talk to everybody, although he is a professing Christian, and
Mhm.
so I feel like he would maybe want to talk to my audience to try
Mhm.
to win them over. So anyway, I don't know. I still hope maybe that happens at some point, but barring that, I kind of feel like I'm stuck in the position of, at least, like, I'm not going to necessarily try to I'm I'm not like going to, like, be in the YouTube comments or, you know, MSNBC comments or wherever if he gets on something big and being
Mhm.
like, "Yeah, but Chase wants to trans the kids," you know what I mean? Like, I'm not
Right.
going to be doing that,
Sure,
but
sure.
I'm probably going to be kind of, either not vocal, or when I am vocal, if he has a good moment, I'll give him credit, but I don't want to support him and be in a position where I can't just say what I think and feel.
Mhm.
And again, that's probably partly due to the incentives I have just as someone who's a content creator and a podcaster. And I don't want to be seen as politicking, I guess, from this position, because I don't think that's my primary job. Although it might be different in my
Right.
capacity as, like, if I were to just go out and be conversing with people on the streets. It's probably somewhat setting dependent, but
Right. When it comes
we're
to defending people or talking or supporting people, I think it's a lot easier to support them in the early stages when things are easy, right? Like, so if you wait until he gets, like, let's say that in 2 or 3 months, he gets, huge major media attention and all of these things come up. So what's going to happen is when they come up, people at that level are very clever and they're very good at distorting things. And they can easily make something look way worse than it really is. It's like I tell people, I'm like, if you get into politics, you may not have any skeletons in your closet, but there are players out there that can make something that's, inconsequential look like the worst skeleton in your closet that you could possibly have. They are good at that kind of spin. So I tell people, I'm like, if you can't handle the ugly truth, how are you going to handle pretty lies about you or the LP? So we need to get started now. So if you're going to support him and start now, better to do it now when it's easier. Because trust me, I know that a lot of libertarians think that they're making really strong arguments, but they're really not. Like they're not coming out with the spins that somebody that wants to ensure that Trump or Biden wins will make, because those people pay thousands and thousands of dollars for people to come up with creative spins, right? That we can't dream of. So if we can't deal with them at the level that we're at now, we're not going to be able to deal with them should he get any more media attention. So therefore, in my opinion, we ought to start now if we're willing to. The other thing I'll point out is that we often talk in the libertarian community, we talk about moving this Overton window. We're like, oh, we're going to move the Overton window. We're going to expand what we can talk about. We're going to influence the Republicans. We're going to influence the Democrats. If we can't influence our own damn people, sorry, I don't know if you, I apologize for profanity there,
you're fine.
but if we can't influence our own people, we're not prepared to influence the Republicans or the Democrats. We're just simply not. And so one of the things that I think is necessary is that we don't have to be full on support of everything that Chase says. And I don't think there's a candidate out there that we would always. I mean, there might be a few candidates where you're like, the disagreements I have are so few and far in between that it's not really worth talking about. But there's never a candidate that you're going to be 100% on board with everything, right? There's going to be something somewhere that you're going to disagree with. And it's just a matter of degrees. And so I look at it and I say, one of the things that we ought to be doing is right now, Chase's circle probably doesn't have many, if you will, Mises centered folks, right? Like it's probably the non-Mises folks that are influencing him. So if we if we want to support him, we should probably support him early on so that we could kind of get a little bit of influence in there. And we can say, hey, man, I think you need to readjust and rethink this, in the early stages, because chances are, like any person that's running for office, he's going to realize the way that he said things maybe wasn't so good, or that maybe he had a bad take. And we want to, if you want to influence him at any level, it's got to start early, because in another month or two, we're done. There's no more influence to be had from the libertarian community, because as he goes along, the more the closer he gets to November, the less likely he's going to be willing to hear from people that were not supporting him along the way. It's the, hey, you weren't with me when I was nobody. Why should I listen to you when I'm somebody? And I'm kind of being a little bit loose with those terms,
Yeah,
right?
I kind of wonder if he's already there though, because of
Maybe,
how much people opposed him, before and even during
maybe
convention.
he might be, but I still think
Yeah,
there's hope. If
I
people were to
hope
say
so.
like,
I mean, again, I've stated multiple times, and I've reached out formally and informally with Chase. I've met Chase personally. Him and I had like a past beef that I buried the hatchet with him on when he
mhm,
was in Pennsylvania. Uh, I'd love to be someone who could, do the thing you just said. And I know other people who've tried and they just haven't been successful. Unfortunately, actually, one ended up quitting uh, the campaign, I think, because they were having issues. So I don't know. I know there's a lot of things in flux. It's
mhm,
like early on, I was kind of like they're merging campaigns and he's real busy. But the more time goes on, the more it's like, and I'm not the only one. Like I know even Dave Smith said, "Hey, why don't I'll invite Chase on my platform and we'll
mhm,
talk and we'll see if we can't like resolve some of our disagreements, come away, at a different position where maybe people like Dave and me feel more comfortable with trying to support him." Um, it just doesn't seem like, I mean, either it's not on his radar and I don't know how to get it more on his radar than what we've already tried, or it is on his radar and he just doesn't think
right. I,
it's
I,
worthwhile.
I think what's and I'm guessing, because I don't have the kind of connection with Chase to be able to speak on his behalf specifically, but I'm just guessing based on what I've observed. I think it's going to be tough because people have been so difficult with him. And this goes back even before DC, right? Before he actually won the position. Because like months ago, and I'm just going to, I won't name names, but you'll probably figure it out. There was a particular um Twitter account that had a huge following that was interviewing everybody but libertarians. And then Chase kind of spoke up, and it was like there was a little bit of kerfluffle back and forth. And then the account was like, "Well, you're just being rude to me." And I was like, okay, that wasn't very rude in my opinion, but okay, whatever." And then the next thing it was like, "Okay, well, Chase, you want to come on here and talk about your transing positions?" And it was like nobody seems to want to have a conversation unless they're really wanting to challenge him on a particular issue or two. So it's very, very hostile. And that doesn't lead people to getting in there and being influential, right? Like that doesn't, that, like if I was running and people were like, DL, I'm going to take your worst position that I hate you for. And that's the only reason I'm going to talk to you is if I can just debate you on that. Okay, well, yeah, I've got better things to do because I'm literally trying to win support, not fight people. I'm trying to
So
get
I
people to
I
vote for me.
I
And so
hear
if
you.
the community would dial it down, we might actually be able to get him on a Dave Smith, because I do believe that Dave Smith of all people would he means it when he says, because I saw his tweet. He said, "Look, I will be as cordial and respectable as possible, and we'll just work. We'll have a proper conversation." I believe Dave when he says that, right? But I think the community has made it already very, very difficult in the way that they've behaved. They've kind of cut their own feet out from underneath of them.
I mean, maybe,
No,
but
not
I guess
maybe.
the
I think
slight pushback.
absolutely.
Well, I think the slight pushback I'd have on that is that Chase isn't an idiot. Like Chase had to
I
have
mean,
been expecting this.
I
And I guess, and that's my like. I hear what
should
you're
we not
saying,
have
but it almost
expected it?
kind of, well, sure, but also, I mean, like, I could also say, do you expect that any of us are going to be able to dial down the tone of libertarian Twitter? I mean, I've tried.
Right, right.
I
But
tried to do a sit
we
down
need to have a
between
frank
Dave Smith
conversation.
and Michael Heiss and LPNH
Mhm.
to resolve that. That only made things
Sure.
worse. So
No,
it's
no,
like,
I get it, but we need to have an honest conversation with our own community, and we need to say, like, "Look, if I had been going at let's put it this way, um, I gave Clint Russell a hard time about not directly, but I had come out with some comments, and I said, "Here's why I think things went the way they did in DC," and I was critical of Clint Russell, and he got mad at me, and I don't think the shade that I threw at him was anywhere near the level that has been thrown at Chase. Clint blocked me within that same day, okay? He blocked me. He wasn't even willing to have a further conversation. He didn't say, "Come on my podcast and let's talk about it. Can I come on yours? Let's hash this out." And the level of difficulty that I gave Clint was nothing that was compared to Chase. So if Clint isn't willing to have a conversation with me about my disagreements on why he lost, if he's not willing to have that conversation and he was willing to block me, then why should anybody expect anything different from Chase? Why should they expect him to give any time of day to anybody else? Because they've been brutal with him. And again, they've been
well,
brutal
listen,
on an issue that I'm not sure is that important to the general electorate.
so again, I think it's important to at least half of the general electorate, but we might just disagree a little bit on that. I mean, I like Clint, but I think he was wrong to block you. I think that there's way too many
I'm not
people
that
on
mad. I'm
Twitter
not
who
trying to
are.
bring him
Well, no,
up,
I know.
why
But
he's,
I was making a point here.
yeah.
I actually think, um, I think people are generally too fragile on social media and block too eagerly.
Mhm.
There are some people who deserve to be blocked. You're
Sure,
not one
sure.
of them, in my opinion. I will say that again. I just feel like, again, it's not like Chase is like Charles Belay who just walked into the party 2 months ago, right?
Right.
Like Chase has known for a long time coming that this was the uphill battle he was going to be fighting, and
Mhm.
he said, like, the whole deal was like, we're going to have a unity ticket. But I
Mhm.
don't see the effort. I'm like, dude, like, if you wanted to unite this party and if you were serious about it, and you've known for a long time that if you were going to get this far, that there were going to be these kind of tensions, where is the effort or leadership on his part to try to reach across the aisle and do those kinds of things? Like, I kind of feel like maybe it's fair to say that some accountability should be held on the party members,
Mhm.
but I don't think that Chase is uh devoid of that
No.
same criticism.
No, he's not. And I've been very clear on social media. I think that he should go on some of these. I believe that he should go on even some of them that are hostile if the audience is sizable enough. Like if I called him up and said, or if I reached out and said, "Hey, come on my podcast. I'm going to grill the hell out of you." Right? Like I don't think it makes sense for him to come on my podcast and spend that kind of time because I have a much, much smaller audience. And I don't think that there's a huge benefit for him and his time. He's very busy. He's trying to get out to 50 states. I've seen his calendar. His calendar is like full as all get out. So, he's on the road. I don't think he's going back to Georgia for a long time. So I get it. He's got to be picky at this point, even as small scale as he is, right? Um, but again, that's the point. Like we need to do our part, and then it makes it easier to insist that he does his part. So I agree he should go on some of these shows. Like I thought he should have went on Tim Pool because Tim Pool is sizable enough, and I know it was going to be hostile, right? Like Tim Pool's going to do Tim Pool thing. Jeremy Kaufman was going to be hostile to him, but I'm like, this is part of the game that you've signed up to play, and you can't always just go on friendly media. That doesn't work.
I agree.
Have to go on some media that's going to be hostile, but he does need to be
Yeah,
choosy about it. And I think he should have
sure.
accepted Dave Smith's offer because I think Dave Smith was going to be a little bit like maybe not entirely neutral, but it wasn't going to be hostile, right? He was going to push
Yeah.
back and maybe be challenging. But I think if there was ever a podcast that has a huge audience where he was going to get the most fair treatment, so far as I've heard, probably going to be Dave, as far as people that have offered. and he should have.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But I think we make the argument difficult. It's like, hey, I would love to lean in on Chase and be like, dude, and you know, whatever tiny itty bitty pull that I have from having met him personally and been relatively supportive, say, dude, you need to go on this podcast. But if everybody's just looking for a bloodbath, then there's no incentive for him. And so I think we need to come to our own senses and be like, all right, look, he's the guy that we got. He's not great in some of these areas, or maybe even you might think of it as terrible. But I think we need to recognize and say, all right, how can we sell this? Because at the end of the day, all a politician is it's a sales game. That's all it is. You're selling
Yeah, and
something.
I can see myself being able to, again, if things go the right way, I can see myself trying to, I don't want to say use him, that maybe sounds
Mhm.
like the wrong word, but like, leverage his campaign in a way to at least support the message, the messaging that he's good on and that I agree with him on being put into, and especially after that debate, it's like, it's tough because I have played the role as the devil's advocate this entire time, but I do also still come back to like, as much as I really don't like him on these things, I really want someone to be out there actually putting libertarian ideas out there, and there's no one doing it right now
Right.
other than Chase, and so it's tough. So I think you have some valid points and arguments here. I've really enjoyed the back and forth.
Mhm.
I hope the audience has as well. Again, if you guys, we're going to be signing off here soon. Give
Sure.
a thumbs up on this stream if you haven't already. I see a lot of you out there watching it. But DL, I understand where you're coming from. Um, I think your message overall in terms of telling people that, um, I think the common thread here is that we as a movement and as a party, we do have some growing up to do. And
Mhm.
I think that that's across the board. Like in terms of this is a little bit more meta, not really about Chase anymore, but it's related. Like my struggles with trying to find people to support in this party are that I often find people that I'm ideologically aligned with, but they don't seem especially serious about the party. But then but I sometimes see the same problem, but like in reverse from the other side. There are some people who I think become overly serious about the party,
Mhm.
if that makes any sense. Like it becomes like too party centric. And then I don't know, there's just such bad faith behavior on both sides. Like people can look to the MC and leadership and maybe think some of the things that happened around the national convention weren't exactly kosher. I could say a lot of the tactics that happened at the floor of convention, which I wasn't there for, but what can I can tell, a lot of the tactics didn't seem exactly above board or kosher
Mhm.
either. Um, I don't know what the solution is exactly. The divide, like the Chase is sort of the I don't know, the line in the sand right now for the ideological divide within the party that's been persisting for a while. It's
Mhm.
almost like this is the current field for what's been going on for a while. And I don't know that there's a way past it, which is also, I guess, part of my frustration is that I think someone like Chase is only, even, I'm not even saying it's all his fault. I'm just
Mhm.
saying the consequences of this because of the state of the party on both of these sides, it just feels like we're only making things worse.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what your thoughts are on that as we, maybe this will kind of be like the last question. I
Sure.
know it's kind of a meta one, but like what do you see in terms of like to both sides? What do they need to do to kind of grow up and to get this party going in a better direction? Because I mean, as much as we can talk about Chase right now, he's only going to be the candidate for an X amount of months. And then
Right.
guess what? We got 4 more years to the next candidate. And we got
Right.
that's a long time of having to deal with
Mhm.
intra party things and
Yep.
ballot access and local candidates and all that,
Mhm.
which is also very important.
So I think the first thing that we can do as people in the movement, whether you're involved in the party or not, is to think of ourselves as the adult in the room. And the children are not fellow libertarians. They are Republicans and Democrats, specifically speaking to the candidates, right? Not necessarily the people per se, but candidates, because the candidates promise a lot and then they do whatever they darn well please. They do whatever their party generally wants them to. We've got plenty of evidence to support that. So we need to think of ourselves as the adults and say, okay, I'm the adult in the room. How am I going to present the message with the messenger that I have? So I did an experiment a long time ago when New Hampshire was really getting a lot of momentum with a lot of their crazy tweets. I started talking to some of my friends and I said, I wanted to challenge myself and see that if I could tell them about a tweet and then watch their face and then turn that, not spin it, which I guess, distinction without difference or whatever, but difference without distinction, but turn it into a conversation that I could work with. Okay. So I told one of my friends, I said, look, this state party, they tweeted out a picture of Meghan McCain crying over her dad's funeral. And I can't remember the exact wording that they used, but I told her the wording. I told her about it. And she visibly bristled. Now she's a more progressive person. Okay. So she's like more liberal and a friend of mine. And I mean, you could see it. She was like, she just, and then I said, okay, let me tell you where they're coming from. And I said, we are a very anti-war party. And for us, we look at the deaths of civilians as a very serious thing. And that there's a lot of just very casual, like, well, that's just what happens in war. And we don't accept it. We don't buy this because we believe that people, one, have like allowed themselves to be complacent with this idea that this is what happens in war. So we take the idea that 10, 100, thousands of civilians, innocent women and children and some men too, who are not combatants, this is a very big deal to us. So for us, we look at it and we say, your dad is responsible for, I don't even know how many thousands of innocent lives lost. So we're a little bit less sympathetic to his death than you are. And this is why we make fun of him,
Right.
because this is our way of expressing our disdain for the many thousands of civilians, women and children that have been killed because of the decisions that he made. And she was like, okay. Now she got it. She didn't agree necessarily, but she got it. And I
Yeah.
turned her bristling into at least somewhat understanding. And I feel like this is something that the Libertarian Party, the members, the movement, we really need to work on. We need to learn how to take a message that somebody says. Now, we won't always be able to do it. There'll be times where maybe like that was just too darn far. And there's not much we can do with that, right? If somebody's like, we should lower the age of consent, like that one's going to be a difficult one, right?
Yeah.
Like that one's crazy. So there are some crazy ideas out there that we can't really work with. But I think that more often than not, it's a matter of that we are underdeveloped in our own ability to communicate. That's causing
Yeah.
us problems, right? Chase, and he's like, hey, you know what? I think that these should be medical decisions that are between a family and their doctor. Awesome. Me too. Because when my son needed an eye surgery and it was questionable because we couldn't know exactly what the future would hold with his eye, we made the best decision possible with our doctor, right? And imagine if the issue of gender was as separated from cultural battles in school as my son's eye was. There was no schools trying to talk about, eyesight and things along that line. So it was totally a conversation between me, my wife, my doctor, or his doctor, right? But right now, the gender issue, that's not where it is. It's involved in the schools. It's involved in like corporations are talking about it. Like it's all over the place. So we need to absolutely bring it back to a medical decision. And you know what I bet would happen? I bet we would almost never hear about gender transitioning because a large part of it, as many people have argued, is it's basically a social contagion. Well,
Yeah.
the way that you kill a social contagion is you bring it back to the family. So his position is absolutely correct. Will there be some kids that maybe get transitioned that might, that shouldn't? Well, yeah. The same way that pretty much kids that are on ADHD medication that shouldn't be, SSRIs, and possibly even some surgical procedures, right? There will always be some that fall through the cracks. So I think the answer is be the adult and learn how to communicate when the message isn't to your liking. That means we have to get out and practice this, and we have to
Yeah.
get uncomfortable, period.
And I think it would also help. I did this on a space maybe a couple weeks after the nomination, or like a week after the nomination with the Christian caucus. And I was saying, you know what? As much as I'm not happy with Chase, if people start attacking libertarianism because of Chase's position, we can be critical of his position, but we also have to not let people off the hook for that. Because if we're going to have the proponents of mass war, of mass economic uh, uh, sabotage to
Mhm,
the American people, the people who are responsible for all this death and destruction in society, you know, basically play the card of what about the kids?
mhm,
We need to throw that back in their faces and be like, you know what? Maybe Chase isn't good on this issue, but you don't have a leg to stand on if you're going to tell me this is about caring about the children. In the
mhm,
same way that, listen, I'm pro life, but I hold the pro life crowd who is largely pro war to their feet to the fire all the time. Be like, you're not pro
right,
life. I'm pro life because I oppose abortion and I oppose dropping bombs on you
right,
know fat families and homes and stuff in other countries, whereas you don't. And so I think
mhm,
it's kind of something we should do with this as well, is to be like, you know what, maybe Chase isn't great on this issue, and I disagree with him, but you know what, his stances overall are actually better for families and better for children and more in the defense of children than your average Republican or Democrat candidate or voters' positions are. And so I think that kind of speaks to your point that there is always a way to try to spin it. And I don't know. I think that's a fair argument. So
yeah, I mean,
uh,
I hate to use the word spin, but, I mean, effectively, I guess that's what you're doing, but for me, I look at it and I say,
well, it's the truth. It's not
all
even just spin. It's the truth.
right, all I'm doing is like, if his position was something different where he was like, "Yeah, I think that every child that wants to that believes that they're, in the wrong body, they should get medication." Like that would be very difficult to reconcile, and I don't really think I would be able to reconcile it, right? Because that's a very affirmative position. But his position is more like, let the families and the doctors decide. Well, great, that's what we do already. And so long as we remove the outside influences, then I think you're going to get the better answer for those children. Not to mention, war is still my biggest issue because, like, how many thousands of children were killed in Palestine from bombs dropping on them? Well, I can
Yeah.
tell you that between the years 2017 and 2021, according to the data, only like less than 5,000 children were put on puberty blockers for gender affirming care. Less than 5,000 in 4-year period. Okay. In a 1-year period in any war, many, many more thousands of children have been killed. Right. So for me, I'm like, that's the more important issue. Because I have a limited amount of time, I have to make decisions and I have
Sure.
to
No,
decide
that's
what's
fair.
important to me. And I cannot support Trump because he's already saying, keep going,
Yeah. No,
and
it's
Biden, he's definitely on the same path as
even I
well.
mean, like, yeah, like even people like, what if Trump added Vivek? And I'm like, no. Like even then, it would have to be like a 180 in his messaging, and I don't foresee that happening at all. And even then, I'd have less reason. I don't have much of a reason to trust Trump if he did start trying to pander to libertarian messaging more. So I'm with you there. DL, we're over time, but I've
Oh,
enjoyed this back and forth. I think you've presented a pretty uh, strong case here, and you've done a good job at handling some of the concerns and objections I've thrown your way. Before we sign off, you want to give a quick closing thought and then just kind of plug your channel and tell people where they can find you at.
sure. Closing thought. Think about being the adult in the room and disputing Republicans and Democrats because they have failed us repeatedly over and over and over for decades. There's all of about 3 or 4 that we look at and we say, yeah, those are pretty good Republicans, right? Like, because they're probably more libertarian or at least got some very strong libertarian leanings. But for the most part, they fail us repeatedly. And the way to do that, I'm gonna throw this out there because I love saying it. Toastmasters. Swear to God, libertarians, go to Toastmasters because you will learn so many valuable skills when it comes to communicating. I'm telling you that, like, if people think I'm even a shred of a decent speaker, it's because of Toastmasters. And if I'm not, then, well, I don't know what I don't know what to say.
We got a big
But I really
Toastmasters
believe,
guy here in PA.
yeah, I believe that Toastmasters really will help you define your ability to communicate on the fly, to really think about arguments, to think about, how do I defend in this particular, like, it just is, it's a very, it delivers very well. So I would encourage, even if you're like, look, I hate your ideas about Chase, go to Toastmasters at least. I swear it'll make you a better libertarian when you're communicating with all your friends and family. As far as finding me, you can find me Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter, and then you can go to Liberty Dad. I'm sorry, youtube.libertydad.com or rumble.libertydad.com, and you can find my channel there. I try to do Monday through Friday, 7 a.m., but it is, it's not my primary job, so sometimes it has to take a back seat.
Cool. Well, DL, again, I appreciate you coming on. I think
Mhm.
you made some good points, and I think we gave the audience a lot to chew on there. As always, as my position with the Libertarian Christian Institute, we're a nonprofit, so we won't tell you who to vote for or make any endorsements. But in terms of educating people on the issues, on what libertarians stand for and what the current candidate stands for, and sort of what the different arguments on different sides are, I hope that this was a productive and educational conversation for all of you listening. Again, if you haven't already, give this stream a like, subscribe if you haven't already. If you like this kind of content, I'll be doing as much as I can up until the moment my wife gives birth, and then I'll be taking a couple-week break to focus on her.
Mhm. I hear you.
But yeah, DL, I appreciate it. I'll have to have you back on sometime to talk about more like, family stuff and some. There's a lot of stuff you talk about on your show that I really like. So we'll
Yeah.
have to do a follow-up to this that's less on disagreements and more on the
Hey,
things
one of
that
these
we
days,
agree
get you
on.
on Dad Talk,
Sure, absolutely, would love to
where
do
we
it.
just talk about being a dad. That's it. Nope, not necessarily politics, just being a dad and what it means to you.
Politics is downstream of culture, and the culture comes from uh, family and church and community. So that stuff matters even more than what we're talking about here, I think.
Mhm.
So anyway, DL, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.
Have a good one.